Hello and welcome to class 5. I hope you're enjoying the class and getting a lot out of it so far. So we've covered a lot of information over the past couple weeks. I do hope you had a chance to utilize the Foundation Center's website and pull some great information there for some funding services to basically explore all the different options. And again, I think you'll find it pretty amazing the number of foundations and funders that are out there, and the tool of the Foundation Center is certainly a great resource. All right, let's start out by just going over briefly, as a reminder, some information about your upcoming assignments. So the goal, as you're writing your goal, remember the goal represents the what, the grand vision that you aspire to see, this situation, this world that you're trying to create where no child is hungry, or all children have access to reading materials, or, the streams are all clean, whatever that may be. And then think of your objectives as the incremental accomplishments that will push you to reaching that goal. So the objective, educate parents, uh, um, eh, all these different things, establish these programs, and then, of course, how they're going to be moving you toward that grand vision. And then the method is the how to. What are the things that have to occur to actually make each objective a possible, or and something that's actually going to work? All right, so the objective again, thinking back on the SMART approach, it's one, you have to have a time frame. You have to say, we will start here and stop here. Now, everything in your proposal doesn't begin at the same time. Obviously, there are things that have to occur before some other things. So when you're writing your methods and your objectives and all of these different aspects, make sure that they're in sequence. You want to keep things in order. So you need the time frame. You need to list the individuals that you're going to be serving, assuming that you're helping people rather than animals or the environment or something like that. So make sure you list the demographic, if you will, in specific as much as you can, and then the number of people with any objective. So if the objective is to read to 100 kids a week, or to provide materials, or to elevate knowledge for 50% of, whatever that is, it has to be measurable, has to have a number on it, because there's no way you know if you're going to hit that goal if you don't have an actual number by it. And then what is the demographic area of your, so you don't, now, I mean, you may be serving the whole city or the whole county. If so, you can say that, but just make sure that you can actually do that. So be specific about who you're serving, what you want to see happen, and where that will occur. All right, so the methods are called also your implementation. In other words, they're the things that are going to have to happen to make your objectives possible. So what needs to occur before you can actually, so at the planning stage, what are the things that need to occur? And then you're going to list the person responsible. Who is it that's in charge of this? And that doesn't mean every person that's going to be involved. That means who's taking the lead. And then number 3, again, when will you start and stop this? So the starting could be at the beginning, early stages, when you're making plans, you're meeting people. And then when you talk about who's responsible, make sure you list the qualifications. So you could say this is an individual who has 20 years of experience, or who has a master's degree in this or that, or has done similar programs. All right, and then also on the implementation, there are activities that typically occur before. So it's possible some activities will be, once it starts or after, but just think about this. What are the staffing patterns? Now, the staffing patterns don't just mean who's at the organization now. It may mean you need to hire people. So you need to analyze, does the organization have the people in place to carry out this? Or through this grant, would we actually need to hire a new person? As an example, a program manager, or a coordinator, or something like that. So develop those staffing patterns. Make sure the site is appropriate. You may not be implementing this on the actual organization site. You may have to go out in the community. You may need to lease a building. You may need to make reservations. And then in that process, see how all of these are going to tie into your budget, because you're going to determine if you're going to have to hire people. If you're getting a site, do you have to pay rent? Do you have to lease it? How much will that cost? And then you need to determine what kind of equipment do you need. So if you're going to go out to a site, somewhere else, you may need tables. You may need brochures. You may need a microphone, a portable PA system. There are lots of considerations. You may need to get some pop-up banners or some posters that you can hang. You may need to print posters before you even begin your program. So part of that then is going to be who's going to do the graphic design. Do you have a graphic designer? So then that goes back to the staffing. Well, you need to hire a graphic designer. Number 4, select the program materials. So there you go, brochures, educational things. You may actually need to establish a website. So what are the things you're going to need to be successful in this program? Are you going to need to meet with other nonprofits or other entities because it may be some type of a collaboration or partnership? So think about those meetings. Think about who you need to meet. Think about the people and the partnerships that may need to be involved, because that can take months. It could be weeks, but it could be months in advance getting those partnerships set up. And part of that, developing that, could be some kind of memorandum of understanding of how they would work in your program. And then you may need to develop some marketing, PR, outreach strategies. In other words, how are you going to inform the people that a program exists? How are you going to recruit volunteers? All of the different aspects that may include communication of some kind. All right, and then you may need to do some research on the people that you're going to be serving. And to figure out, you may need preliminary data to know if this program is the best and right way to reach them, or other things that may have occurred before. And then number 9, you need to set up evaluation methods. And let's talk about that now. So evaluation is a huge part of this work. So just think of the objectives as the actions. Think of evaluation as the outcomes, or the impact, the result of the things that you're doing. So evaluations represent the ROI, the return on investment. Did it work? Can you prove it worked? Because if you can't prove it, you really don't know if it worked or not. So evaluation is a really critical aspect of your program and your proposal. So here's sort of a flow chart of how this works. You see the goal at the top. The objectives are, again, the things that you need to do to measure those, to accomplish that goal. Underneath of each objective will be multiple activities that must occur. Methods, things that need to be planned, implementation. You see how it's sort of a pyramid, or an inverted pyramid, how everything flows together. So that means everything has to be connected. Everything has to align. If you said you're going to do something, I want to know who's going to do it. And if it involves, purchasing equipment or more people, I want to know how is that being paid for. So it all must be connected. So evaluation is something that a lot of organizations don't do well. You can see how each one of these aspects of the proposal really do get into the weeds pretty deep. And they force an organization to really think through every aspect of what do they have now and their strengths and what they'll be good at, and what are the possible weaknesses of their program now or the proposal they're putting together, and how can they address those possible weaknesses? What can they do to bring in and to fill those gaps? So the idea is that you address each one of these, and as the grant reviewer looks at that, then he or she has confidence that you've thought through every detail and you really do know how to do this. You've made an honest assessment of the work, and you believe that through this plan, you're actually going to be determining success, and you know that if these things occur as you say they will occur, there's going to be success. You'll be able to see the outcome. Now, I have, this is like a semester-long topic right here, but I just want to emphasize this. Donors, which include foundations and funders, but they also include individuals. But especially in the world we live today, there's a higher level of accountability than there's ever been before. And part of that accountability is that you can prove your work. You're not going to get funding anymore just because you do good work. You're going to get money now because you can prove your outcomes, not your activities. So I throw up here some, obviously the United Way gives money to their agencies, but other large worldwide entities will be like the Pew Charitable Trust, the Gates Foundation, the largest in the world, and they're focused on the outcomes or the activity, not the activities. They want to know if their investment's working and how you can prove it. So an outcome is basically this. You can tell a donor, an individual, a foundation, look, we want to do this thing. We're going to do this. If you will invest in us, we will closely monitor how it works. We will evaluate it, we'll assess it, and we're going to be able to come back and say, yes, it worked, and your trust in us and your investment paid off. If you don't take that approach, I think you're just a do-gooder. I think you have a good heart and you love puppies and people, but honestly, I don't think you know if it really worked. And I just think that organizations better shift their thinking right now and start thinking more about outcomes. So again, an activity is that thing you do. The outcome is what happened because you did it. So the activity is you feed kids. Well, that's good, but what happened because you feed kids? You feed kids, they're not hungry, they can focus better, they have better grades, they're more likely to stay in school and more likely to graduate. And then when we get into activity assessment, look, we have to put that specific number with it. We're going to serve 100 kids. We're going to provide tutoring, a specific number of hours, and 9 out of 10 youth will attend our art classes. And then look below that, now we know what happened because of the activity. 75% increased in knowledge, half of the youth had improved grades, and 25% reported being bullied, fewer reported being bullied. So again, that tells you the progress. So if you remember, one of the things I talked about earlier was the degree of change. What is the degree of change? And the outcome shows that degree right there. All right, so another thing. Is this a good one? 100 junior high students will increase their knowledge by 75% about the dangers. Well, it's partially good because it says who and it says how much. It doesn't necessarily say when, and it doesn't, it's not as clear as it could be. It should say when, like what's the time frame that will occur. But that is an outcome. So it has a goal and it has something that's measurable. All right, the steps to evaluation. Before you even start your program, you have to know what you want to accomplish. You can't just say, be better. You have to say how much. And then what kind of evidence are you going to need to prove that they changed? So before you begin your program, you have to have a data collection plan, figure out what you're going to do, who's going to do it, and how you're going to report that back. These things have to occur before you implement the program, not after you're in it, and then you go back later and say, boy, I wish we had thought of this or done this thing. What's the difference between qualitative and quantitative? It's really quite simple. Quantitative, from the word quantity, comes from numbers or data, whereas qualitative is more about the feelings behind it, the why. Why did it occur? So you can think of it like this. You're interpreting the data. What does it mean? Why did it happen? So I just throw up an example here. Here's a picture. So the quantitative is a non-negotiable. It's a picture. It's 10 by 14. It has a frame. It weighs this much. It's this old. It costs this much. Now, those are non-negotiable things. That's hard data. But then we can look at the qualitative. We can talk about the feeling. We can talk about the smell, the memories it might evoke. We can talk about the style of it. We can talk about the value of it. Those are all qualitative things. They're not hard and fast numbers, but they have more of an interpretive, descriptive manner. So when we talk about people, we can say, how did it make someone feel? How did it change their life? But the qualitative or the quantitative is, this is the number of people. This is the time we serve. This is the number of things we provided. All right. Oh, so down here, I just put a little graphic. Those are the feelings. Because it occurred, they feel happier, they feel safer, they feel stronger, they belong. So that's part of the qualitative. All right, so you might focus, one of the simplest ways to measure is simply a pre-test and a post-test. So the pre-test says, we think this is the condition, but let's find out. So when they come in, they first meet the individual, you can say, what do you know about this? What do you feel? How does it affect you? Then you implement your program, and at the end of that time frame, whether it's a week or 3 months or whatever, you go back and say, hey, when you started this program, you said this, but now that it's over, how do you feel? Or how has that changed? Or you can say, when you started the program, you scored this thing a 3 out of 10. Now the program's done, where do you score it? So you can do this in person, you can do focus groups, you can do one-on-one, you can do electronic surveys. There are lots of ways to do it. But pre and post tests, probably one of the simplest things that you can do. Now here are some resources to consider. So quantitative, of course, you're going to look at reports, you're going to look at demographics, you're going to look at different activities, hours spent. Whereas the quantitative, you're actually going to ask them questions. You could even do interviews. You could do recordings. You could use other kinds of tests that assess these, and there are many of them out there. So in the planning stage, you have to determine who within our program is responsible for this, who will design the surveys, who will actually hand the surveys out, who will collect the data, who enters the data in some kind of system, software program, who analyzes the data, who's responsible for guarding it to make because of confidentiality reasons, and what's the timeline. Now, it's not as overwhelming as it might sound, but these are just the basics of good research. And just a little bit on research, basically there are two kinds of samplings that you are typically going to use. One's a probability, which says everybody within this range or this group that you're working, everybody has the same opportunity to be included. Whereas a non-probability sampling means that you select people. So as an example, if you served 100 and you served for 3 weeks, you might say, we're going to interview people for 1 week. So it's a sampling of the people who came. Or you can say, we'll interview people from 8 to noon instead of all day. So, I mean, you can do it either way, but just to let you know, it's not all the same. And just a short word of caution on this. Don't try to measure things you don't do. Now, that almost sounds laughable, but in truth, just measure what you do and measure things that are within your control. So as an example, if you provided a counselor and then you refer them on to someone else for family therapy, you don't measure success for family therapy because you didn't do that. You measure how they came in, the condition that they were in when they came in, what your program attempted to do. And now, do you see how this goes back to the objective? Because you decided what you wanted to accomplish. So your objectives drive your evaluation. You decide what you want to accomplish and to what degree, and then you have to say, does this program or service we're offering really have the opportunity to move them at that level by 10% or by 50% or by 100 people or whatever? All right, and then quickly moving on to your timeline, and it's real simple. I mean, this is something that you're going to develop, and it's basically a Gantt chart. You can use an Excel sheet or whatever you like to make these tables. And all you're doing basically here, if you look at the top, every objective has its own list. So in the far left column, you'll see objective number 1 is to recruit and train 100 child advocates. Underneath that are the methods or the implementation. So we know we need to develop print materials, that's a whole method. conduct trainings, send letters, write press releases, and so on. So you see all those. Then if you look over to the right, you see we've said this is a one-year process, and starting with January, it goes all the way to December. You can see by the X's where it starts and where it stops. And that's right, basically all there is to it. I mean, so every objective is going to have its own Gantt chart. I suppose if you had a really long one and enough, now you could put them underneath that. I'm not saying you have to do 4 or 5 of these, but in other words, the methods have to be underneath each objective, however you want. Now, if you like color, you want to do this differently, that's fine with me. You know, if you want to make it that way, just make sure it has the information that it needs to have. One of the things we talked about on the very first lecture is sustainability. There are some foundation grant proposals that will tell you you must have a sustainability strategy. Basically, all a sustainability strategy says is this: what happens to this program after the grant money runs out? That's what they want to know. The foundation is saying this: okay, let's say we fund you. Let's say we give you the money you're asking for. Fine. But if the need continues after this program, this 1 year or 2 years, what we really want to know is, does the whole thing shut down, or can you continue operating it even after our money? This is a really important strategy. So they want to know your ability to maintain it, to keep things going, and just to make sure that you can keep it going. So the strategies, I mean, you know, you can say other things. You can say we will continue seeking funding from other sources. That's okay. You can say we'll include this as part of our annual campaigns, our fundraising. You can say we have what we would call unrelated business income. In other words, we have an entrepreneurial revenue stream. We have other enterprises. We have rental properties. We have things that we bring in revenue for. And I throw up those 2 examples there because, as an example, in Southwest Missouri, the Breast Cancer Foundation of the Ozarks has a revenue stream. They operate several driver's license offices, and that's an ongoing revenue stream for them. So what you don't want to do, though, and just a flag here, you do not want to say, when this money runs out, we'll write another proposal and continue asking you for money. And what you don't want to say is, we will shut the whole thing down if we don't continue to get money from you. You probably won't get funded if you take that approach. Okay, and just real quickly, a little bit on the budget as you may start, and I'll discuss this again in our next lecture. But when you're reviewing proposals, sometimes the foundation will look first at your proposal's budget to see how much you're asking and to see if that aligns. So I just cannot emphasize enough how important it is for everything to align. So you start out with that big goal. This is what we want to do. You explain how much you're trying to move things, the degree of change, and the steps you're going to take to get there under your objectives. Then you get into the implementation. How are we actually going to do this? Those are your methods, how you actually explain. And then you see on the third one, it says, but what's it going to take to actually do this? This explains their part. This explains how you have an idea, you have a dream, you have a vision, you have an idea for how this thing could work, but put the brakes on because we can't do it, Mr. Foundation, without you. So this is where they're going to look at this. They're going to go all the way to the top and make sure all the parts fit together. If it does, you're probably in pretty good shape. And we'll talk about that further in another lecture. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you very much.